Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
3 years ago, living in a new house after my childhood home was foreclosed on and demolished. The first few months, absolutely normal. Nothing noteworthy other than we had an irritating old lady neighbor. Asleep one night, roughly 3 a.m. Feel uneasy and wake up. Look at the foot of the bed. A 4-foot-high shadow with a large head is staring at me. Can't see any distinguishing features, but can still feel its eyes scanning me up and down. I get a sudden feeling of, oh shit, from the entity, like I wasn't supposed to wake up. Didn't feel malicious, though. More startled and frightened than anything. Suddenly darts to the side of bed I'm sleeping on faster than any human could move. Try to kick it in the head, but I see something more like my spirit making the kick, and it just phases through the entity. Now face to face with the creature, but still only see a featureless black blob. Incredibly bright light emanates from the center of its head. Instantly forced back into unconsciousness. Dreamless sleep for a few hours until sun comes up. Wake up feeling extremely anxious and fatigued. The feeling persists for 2 days. Haven't seen another shadow person since. But if it was just a dream, it was so vivid and intense that it's permanently burned itself into my long-term memory. Was never very spiritual one way or another until that night. But ever since, I tend to give more credence to paranormal ramblings.
It was in late 1991. I was solo hunting midweek in the north section of Camp Blanding Wildlife Management Area, here in North Florida. It is better than 60,000 acres separated by a large state road. The main function of the area is a National Guard base, which was a POW camp during World War II for captured German prisoners. This part of the state is lightly populated by Florida standards. Like I said, I was solo hunting midweek, as I did often in my early 20s. It is a cold, clear, windy day here, and the temperature is around 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The wind had been blowing hard all week, but I went out to my favorite spot like I always did. I found a blown-down large oak tree that had a large branch that formed a natural armchair-style seat about 15 feet off the ground. I'd been using it to watch over a natural boundary between a pine grove and an oak ridge. This boundary was essentially a large deer trail and an excellent ambush point. I climbed up the tree and nestled into my spot just after lunchtime, intending to sit until dark. Once I climbed up, I took my orange vest off and wrapped it around the tree above my head. I did this because it would catch on the limb and restrict any movement. Not long after sitting there, I realized the wind was swirling around me, and success was not very likely deer-wise. I decided to stay put and proceed to nap on and off and relax. An hour or so later, I was roused by loud shuffling and rustling in the oak leaves way up to my left. I perked up and listened intently as the noise grew louder and louder. I could see better than 100 yards through the scrub oaks and large pines in all directions, so I knew it was truly a loud sound. I spotted movement off to my left. I could just see something passing through the lighted gaps, moving from my left to the right, about at the limits of my vision. My custom 308 was lying on my leg, and I lifted it to my eye to try to get a glimpse of whatever was causing all the racket. The wind was blowing, and it was making enough noise for me to hear it crashing along above the constant rustle of the leaves. The noise stopped abruptly, and I noticed something looking at me around an oak tree. I arranged myself to get a look at it through my scope, and it appeared to be just a greenish-gray blob resembling Spanish moss. I continued to watch it and appeared to be moving from tree to tree, playing a game of hide-and-seek with me, all the while moving across my horizon. When it got to about there, for better than 5 minutes, I had not moved my crosshair off of it the whole time. I honestly thought of shooting. It never crossed my mind. I had never felt fear in the woods until that second. No matter what was watching me, it had to know that I was aiming at it. I tried and tried to rationalize what I was looking at. I was truly unnerved and decided to slide down the tree and get my butt back to my car. I was parked about a mile away and walked backward the whole way. I've shared this account with select friends over the years and never received any ridicule or doubt from them, as I'm a no BS kind of guy. This is my first ever provable paranormal experience that I physically saw with my own eyes, not just some scary, unverifiable noise. On top of that, I examined all the possibilities and potential causes of this kind of shit, but there's no other explanation for this one other than something paranormal. Be me hanging out with two of my friends one night when I suggested we go to this place I hadn't been to since my childhood. As a kid, I was never in this area at night, only during the day, and even then, to my 5th grade mind, it was sketchy. So I suggested we check out this old decommissioned Superfund site that is only used as dirt bike trails now. Only way to get to it is by walking down these train tracks right into the heart of the site. Most of it is on one side of the tracks, and there's a small bit on the other side. A few people have off themselves on those very tracks as well. At around 1 a.m., we walked to the site from this nearby neighborhood that has an old trail leading to the train tracks. After walking down the train tracks for a bit, there's a spot off to the side opposite from the Superfund site, with a big open area down a hill with a pond at the bottom that's all overgrown and sandy. We decide to walk around the pond and check it out. I got down there and I instantly picked up the odor of feral animal, which kind of spooked me because it could have meant we were in some wild animals territory. Regardless, we just kind of walked around this small pond really quietly while being on edge, because the woods are always spooky at night. After like 10 minutes of doing fuck all, my friends want to smoke, but I decided we should wait until after we get back, which turned out to be a great decision. After walking around the perimeter of the pond, we went back to the tracks and started heading to the car. The smell from earlier was gone, but we smelled it again in a different spot further down the tracks. Towards our exit, we caught an even stronger whiff of the odor. It was like rusty, decaying animal smell. It was like nothing I'd ever smelled before. After we climbed up the small hill to the tracks, we instantly found the smell again. I noticed a large, darker than normal patch off to the left of the tracks right next to the tree line. Note: we don't walk with flashlights since it's easier to see the path once your eyes adjust to the darkness. I had no idea what this thing was. My first thought was that it was a black bear because it looked like it had 4 legs and was kind of foraging around but not really moving. I caught a glimpse of 2 white, beady little eyes for a split second. I'm looking at this blob trying to make out a shape or see if it's moving, but it's not. It's just staying there. My adrenaline kicked in, and I was ready to pick up some rocks and chuck them at the thing in case it started coming at us, but after a few minutes it still hadn't moved. We mustered up enough courage to shine a phone flashlight at it, but we were too far away for the light to reach it. After that, we decided to get closer to shine some light on the situation. Obviously, it didn't work. Once we started moving towards it, it also started moving away from us, at the exact same pace as us. Both of my friends could also see this thing, so it wasn't just my eyes playing tricks on me. As we were walking, this thing was moving along about 100 meters in front of us, separate from the background of trees. This means it wasn't just an open patch in the trees making a slightly darker spot. All 3 of us could see it, so it was definitely there. It was about 7 feet tall and 7 feet wide. When the thing started moving, it sort of lifted off the ground a few feet and looked like a black ball floating. It didn't make a sound, and it didn't joggle up and down like it was stepping. This thing was floating along the side of the train tracks. However, after a couple 100 meters of walking, it just vanished into thin air as we got to our exit trail. All the evidence points to something definitely paranormal. My theory is that they are connected to the Earth on a much more fundamental level than humans. They aren't necessarily as evolved as us, and they aren't really out to hunt you down for dinner. They just kind of live in multiple dimensions and can move throughout them freely. They don't have a very keen sense of their surroundings and most likely rely on energy signatures to perceive their environment. This means they won't notice a human's presence until you are pretty close. They have ocular perception as light, one of the most fundamental aspects of the universe, hence why their most distinguishable feature is their white eyes. They might not even be visible during the day, which is why people think they only come out at night. Anyways, they exist, and for some reason they are becoming more comfortable existing within our dimension. It's as if they are reaching a point in evolution where they are ready to move on to the next tier of existence. That the reason this sort of encounter is becoming more and more common. And don't assume that they are all exactly the same. There could be a wide variety of species that can be found in different regions.
I've never told this story before, not even to my two best friends or my closest family members. This experience happened in the early summer of 2002 in the Mississippi River Valley in the state of Illinois. I was a government employee at the time, so I'll keep the place and specifics vague for the sake of people that have to live around these things. I was 2 months into the job, fully enjoying being the new guy in a new part of the country that I've never seen before. On that day, my job was to do a biological survey on a dry riverbed. It was a boat ramp used to access the area when water was present. I parked my government work truck with the nose towards the riverbed and the boat ramp to my left. I got out of the truck, took several steps ahead to look over the area, and made a plan on how to start my survey. After about a minute, I suddenly was hit with a sense of immediate danger. It was tangible, and it was physical. I could feel the sensation smack into my left shoulder and slide across the skin of my chest from left to right, like being shot with a jet of water from a fire hose. The danger felt like it was coming from knee level or lower, and I backpedaled in an unexplained, sudden panic. I kept my knees bent and my arms forward because I was sure I was being charged by a vicious stray dog that I'd never seen or heard. Once safely back in the truck cab, I looked all around for the dog that I was sure had to be there, and I saw nothing. After about 3 minutes of confusion and adrenaline burn-off, I had no explanation for what had just happened. I laughed to myself for being silly, and I tell myself I have a job to do, so get out and go do it. I get out for a second time and I step forward to my original standing spot to decide how I'm going to start the survey. I again get hit with this fire hose of danger from my toes to the top of my head. I do the same, running fast, backpedaling, and getting back into the truck cab. Both times the feeling disappeared the instant the truck door slammed shut. I'm really spooked. My hands are trembling on the steering wheel while I'm asking myself if I'm having a heart attack or an allergic reaction. I sit there for 7 or 8 minutes trying to recompose myself. I punched the dash in frustration and told myself to get my ass out there and do my job. I was the new guy and did not want to be seen as unreliable. I get out of the truck a third time and step forward to my original standing spot. Now, everything that follows is happening in a split-second sequence, and it'll take longer to explain than it did to experience. The moment my foot stepped onto my original standing spot, I got hit with a 100% blast of the fire hose of danger feeling. I mean absolute primitive fear and danger, like standing on a high-tension bridge that is collapsing with you on it, or standing in front of an avalanche of snow in the last 4 seconds before it hits you. My legs were running before my mind knew I was running. As I spun around and ran for the truck cab, I was saying in a panic to myself that the internal voice cussed, "Get in the damn truck." By my second or third step, I see something in my peripheral vision. To my right, it was just past 3 o'clock, and about 20 feet away there was an unnatural brown color like a Crayola crayon. It was a pear-shaped blob, 5.5 feet tall and the shape and size of a squatting heavyweight sumo wrestler. All I saw was a brown blob, but it clearly stood out from the surrounding nature. I could feel a presence as strong and powerful as a short-tempered rodeo bull. In a split second, I grabbed the door handle. I clearly hear it say in the same voice, "Leave, leave now, leave this place." It was stern, commanding, and calm with none of the panic that was flooding through my mind. I calmed down enough to safely drive home and call it a day.
The blob-like thing with a cube-shaped head from 1957 is the old Saybrook Blockhead. The old Saybrook Blockhead sighting was an extraterrestrial sighting that took place on December 16, 1957, near Old Saybrook, Connecticut. Retired teacher Mrs. Mary M. Starr reported that a bright light awoke her around 2 to 3 in the morning. Peering out her bedroom window, she thought at first that she was looking at a downed airplane until she realized that the object was hovering above her clothesline. Through the craft's large square windows, she witnessed 2 strange entities pass by one another with their right arms in the air. Their featureless appendages had no hands. Their heads were transparent cubes with bright red cores, and their rubbery bodies flared out like skirts. She could not see if they had any legs, but guessed that they were less than 4 feet tall.
So it was around February of 2017. I was 15 and had a dry throat at the time. For that year, I wanted to build a shed in the middle of the woods of my backyard, mainly to just hang out in. As for a fun project to do for the summer months, so on a cold, dry, windy, but yet sunny day, Probably around noonish or late morning, I started to hike alone in the woods of my backyard to begin to find a spot to put down this shed at. The shape and the geography of the section of the property that has the woods is weird. The woods part of the property pokes out like the Oklahoma Panhandle, and to get to the deepest woods of my property, where I wanted to build the shed, you must walk up a hill, and then that hill eventually plateaus. Also, that hill is easily the tallest in the general area, and on the day my encounter happened, I was to see hundreds, if not thousands of feet, especially since there were no leaves on the trees. All in all, it's a 2-minute hike, and in the woods you can see things like rusty barrels and metal fences, mainly because back in the day my backyard woods was a popular hunting spot, which is evident with the rusty metal barrels in the beer cans I found dating back from the 1980s once. But yeah, I hike up through the property and I make it to the plateau hill part. Also note, there was someone's house probably a little over 100 feet from where I was. I had a pretty good viewpoint to their entire property. And then there was a barn in someone's house quite far from where I was, but definitely seeable. So for a couple minutes I started looking for good spots to put this shed. I eventually picked one and started imagining how I should build the shed. I wanted to start from scratch. While I was doing this, I started to hear a 5-note whistle song in the distance. Now I'm not a musician, but I'm going to try my best to describe it. It was 2 notes were long flat notes with a short break between the 2 and the next note, then followed by a higher pitch swinging up note, then quickly a normal swinging note, then back to a long flat note with a higher pitch than the first 2. And whoever was whistling kept repeating it. I looked around for a couple seconds to see if I could find whoever was whistling. It sounded like it was coming deeper into the woods, way downhill. But I didn't see anyone. I also checked the house and barn if I could see anyone, and sure enough, there was no one. What I also thought was strange is that I didn't hear rustling of leaves either. The whole woods was covered in them, and rustling of leaves is loud and could easily give away your location, but there wasn't any rustling. I immediately ignored it as probably one of my neighbors or something. Also, please note that the whistling was definitely not an animal and rather a human. Birds have a chirp like a whistle, but this whistling is more breathy like a human. So I went back to my spot, content that it was a person walking in the woods. After all, that is a pretty logical conclusion. But the whistling kept getting closer and louder, still playing the same 5 notes too. And still there is no one to be seen and no rustling of leaves to be heard. I was very stubborn that it wasn't paranormal, and that it has to be a person, despite the fact that whatever is whistling is coming towards me and I still have no clue of who or what is whistling to me. The whistling was going on for well over a minute now, and eventually the whistling sounded so close to me that it felt like it was someone quite literally whistling to me 5 feet away. It sounded like the whistling was also coming from all directions, so now I started to get a little spooked. I then concluded that whatever this whistling is could be a threat, so I started making my way back to my house, a 2-minute hike. One thing that I forgot to bring up on the Hudson Valley Post is that I didn't run out of there or anything. I just walked back home. I was kind of spooked, but not terrified or anything. I also felt like if I ran, then whatever was whistling at me would pop out and chase me. So I walked and stayed calm to keep whatever it was at a stalking, taunting phase, because it sure did feel like whatever was whistling at me was definitely stalking and taunting me. Now I have to be real with you. This next part of my experience felt quite trance-like, so I could have just hallucinated this part, and as well as the whistling. And I've had things like sleep paralysis episodes several times in my life, and plus, when I'm really tired, I hallucinate things from time to time. But I definitely wasn't tired at the time, nor have I ever had a hallucination episode this big and long ever. All of my tired hallucination and sleep paralysis episodes last from a fraction of a second to several seconds. So if this was a hallucination, this would be by far the craziest one I've ever had. So back to my story. I'm about a minute away from making it to the backyard of my house, still hearing the whistling and such, and I decided to look up, and there it was, something that was all gray, blurry, no face and features, humanoid-like thing was flying above me counterclockwise. It could have been maybe around 5 to 6 in height and had a wingspan around the same. The thing had the silhouette of a person, with a head, 2 arms, torso, and legs, kind of looking like a T with a circle on top acting as the head. I still trusted my gut, and instead of running, I kept walking, Despite the threats, it kept me safe for this long, so might as well keep doing it. Then finally, I took one step onto the grass of my own backyard, and suddenly everything weird stopped. No more whistling, flying things, or a feeling of being in a trance. I remembered smelling roses, though, like it was peaceful. Let's just say after that experience, I didn't want to build a shed in the woods anymore. And for years, even a little bit to this day, I hate being near those backyard woods by myself. The reason why it took me a long time to talk about this story is because I ruled it as a paranormal ghost encounter. And the gray thing was possibly an alien for years, but it wasn't until a few months ago I was reading some cryptid wikis and heard about the Kinderhook Blob monster, and there are a bunch of similarities between my encounter and the blob sightings. First, I don't live crazy far from Kinderhook. I could easily take a drive over there. 2, the thing I saw was kind of blob-like, and one sighting even described it as a humanoid. Plus, it was one whole color and no face, like the blob. And finally, 3, it whistles and flies, which could help explain why I couldn't find anything in the woods, because it was flying above near the trees, which, to be honest, that is kind of funny how oblivious I was to that. And, well, yeah, I definitely heard some whistling.
I don't really come to /x/, but I saw something that I have never been able to explain. Date: December 31st, 2008 or 9. Time 20:30 p.m. Location: Weston-super-Mare, UK. I was walking home from my parents' house, about 15-minute walk, 10 minutes of which is down the same path that faces to the east. As I turned onto the path, I saw a bright light indirectly ahead of me. At first, I thought it was an aircraft. There is an airport close by. This light was heading toward me. After a few moments, I realized it wasn't changing course and was too low and bright to be a plane. I continued to walk toward it, and I realized that whatever it was going to pass straight over me. There were other people on the path, and I didn't want to just stop and look up like a weirdo, so I slowed my walk to give it time. As it passed over, it was a large orange light, just a luminous blob in the sky. It had the same color characteristic as a Chinese lantern, but this was not a lantern. I could tell it was roughly the size of a short-haul passenger jet. I can tell, and I am very used to seeing planes in the sky above where I live. It was as it had just passed over me that I noticed there was a structure to it. Protruding from the light at the back were triangular shapes like the tail of an F-117 or B-2. This moved silently over me and continued west until it disappeared into the clouds. I checked the internet for days after to find a mention of it but found nothing. Weston is a large town and this thing flew straight over, so I have found this very strange.
Be me, long-time tulpa having idiot. Decide to experiment a little bit. Surely nothing could go wrong. Create new thought form is basically half tulpa, half servitor. The idea is for it to have all the power of a tulpa, but I can control it. Create basic form, a white orb with a pearlescent sheen. Do some miscellaneous sigil work, a ritual, etc. Set on the back burner to gradually gain power in the background. Forget. 2 years pass. One day playing around with Tulpa in Mindscape, Tulpa notices a door to one of the realms is oozing. Turns out the thing certainly has been growing, cause this door explodes with this hellish tar of vile rage, engulfs both of us. Wakes me up from meditation, immediately try to summon Tulpa. No response. Only this mass of tar, with this wretched scent. Banish it, thinking it's some intrusive thought gone wild. FF to yesterday, 2 weeks later. Still no response from Tulpa, worried sick. Frantically try to find her, absolutely nowhere, not even a little presence. Find tar Blob instead. Try to communicate with Blob, only thing I get in response is a sudden flash back to 2 years ago when I created that thought form. Oh shit. Apologize, try to reason with it. That seems to calm it down. Tulpa is spat out from the Blob, unconscious. Once she is cleaned off and woken up, the thing is gone. I know it's not gone, because I feel it in the corner of my mind nearly all day. I really hope this goes away soon. Do any of you have experience with dissipating thought forms?
I have a cryptid story from when I was small. I've posted it on this board before, but it's a story I love telling. Be me, around 7-ish. Go for a drive with my parents on a summer evening to grab some ice cream. I live in a northwest suburb of Chicago, a fairly large community. Pass by a house on a corner lot with a large tree in front. Because of how the sun was setting, the house and tree were both deep in shadow. Looking out the car window, admiring the sunset. See something odd in the aforementioned tree, sitting on one of the branches. It's sort of like a big furry black blob with a long tail dropping below the branch. Wow, that's fucking weird. It has two huge red eyes. Wow, that's fucking weird. Think it's probably a lemur or raccoon or a possum. Nah, the tail was too long for a raccoon or an opossum. Wait, lemurs don't live in America, I'm a fucking idiot. A few days later, the house succumbed to a major house fire, leaving it uninhabitable for years to follow. Confused nope.jpg, I've never seen a creature like that since, and for the house to burst into flames so shortly after I saw it, it may not mean anything, of course, but I can't help but wonder if that creature was maybe acting as some kind of omen.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check the Odyssey and Rumble pages for separate archives of previous broadcasts.